Hello and welcome to the Vodafone Business webinar platform. My name's John and I'm your host for this session, but also your moderator. A moderator of your thoughts, your questions and the insights you need from a panel of experts in an important arena. Now, luckily for you, I'm not on my own for this topic. I am joined by a genuine panel of experts. So let me introduce you to them. Firstly, I'd like to introduce a couple of colleagues from Forrester that are really going to bring some market analysis alive. So if I can first ask Madeline to introduce yourself and say hi.
Hi, well, thank you, John. My name is Madeleine van der Hout, and I'm a senior cybersecurity analyst covering security services and CISO leadership within Forrester.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, and you're very welcome to join. Secondly, I'd love to introduce someone I've known for a wee while. And Paul, introduce yourself to those that don't know you.
Thanks very much, John. So my name is Paul McKine. I'm a VP and Research Director here at Forrester, overseeing our tech and security and risk research practices here in EMEA.
That's fantastic. And then finally, but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce a colleague from Vodafone in Andy Linham. Andy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, John. So, my name's Andy. I work in our strategy team in Vodafone Business. So, my role is to have a view of what's going to happen in sort of 3 to 5 years' time, what our customers are going to want, what the technology vendors are going to do, and make sure we've got the right direction of travel for all of our products to make sure we can meet all those needs when they become a reality.
Fantastic. So this is kind of a back to the future Marty McFly moment, folks. What I'm going to do, just to remind you, is I'm your moderator for your questions and insights. In the next 60 minutes, we're going to have 3 chapters of time together. I am in a moment going to hand to our colleagues from Forrester to really get into the market landscape and also get into the specifics of what zero trust kind of means. Andy will then come along and talk about some specific technologies and vertical markets that this is specifically attuned to, and then we'll have a panel conversation at the end. So please use that chat box to get your questions, your insights answered, and through the presentation to keep us all on our toes, I'll be coming back to post some poll questions, and I'm looking for quick answers, folks. So let's get right into this, and I'm going to hand over to Madeline to start explaining why we're here. Madeline, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, today we're going to talk about securing the hybrid workforce and to enable the future of work. So Paul and myself are going to take you through a journey on how work has fundamentally changed and how we can enhance employee experience and business benefits with zero trust. So I still remember 7 years ago, I actually started my career and I worked at an office, and this office supported employees to work from home 40% of their time. And yet everyone in the office was there for 5 days. And even though it was an office jungle, shared multi-user workspaces, everyone returned to the same desk every day. There were even pictures on desks saying, well, you cannot sit at that desk because Frank is sitting there, and he's not only sitting there today, no, he's sitting there always. And I cannot imagine working in that environment anymore. As we all experienced, work has fundamentally changed. The way firms do business transformed in 2020. And we have seen massive migrations to cloud and also multi-cloud environments. And employees shifted to remote work. And that's here to stay. No one wanted to go back in the office, and most offices adopted a hybrid working environment. This heavily disrupted traditional security controls, and security leaders had to adapt to a much larger attack surface. Everything that is accessing data must have an identity, and firms must manage that across people, devices, channels, and hosting models. And there's even one of our clients that mentioned that pre-pandemic, 5% of their workforce was remote. The pandemic flipped this ratio to 95% of the employees that wanted to continue working from home. And while Zero Trust has largely been an academic concept for years, security technology has caught up. And today there are tools for every pillar of the Zero Trust model. And they are not only widely available, they're widely adopted. And this includes identity, access management, network microsegmentation, but also security analytic tools. And anywhere work, it has increased the demand for agile work, just-in-time security to enable productivity. While it was long seen as a roadblock to efficiency, the Zero Trust model gave technology and security leaders the chance to enhance employee experience while enabling employees to work anywhere securely. And Paul will talk in a minute about government influence and involvement. But what I want to emphasize about that is that it has a huge impact on how the importance of cybersecurity learning and awareness has increased. So I do not know if people identify this picture. It's actually painted. It's the storming of the Bastille. And to me, embracing Zero Trust actually kind of is like storming the Bastille, because before, networking and security had a long and complicated relationship together. Historic security and networking approaches did not support today's distributed enterprises, which demand competent, secure connectivity from virtually anywhere. So Zero Trust combines networking functionalities and security capabilities delivered and managed in the cloud, moving away from traditional parameter-based security approaches. To me, the Bastille is a kind of symbol of how things have ever been. So it's Frank still sitting at that desk with his pictures on the desk. It's a status quo, it's authority. Its fall started a revolution, change of mindset, change of approach, change of looking at the workforce, change how to look at securing this workforce, a new perspective on the future of work.
So thank you, Madeleine. Now, as we've discussed, Zero Trust has been something that's also been pushed by governmental organizations. Now, one of the most influential examples of this, which has had ripple effects to us here in the UK and Europe, has been the decision in 2022, nearly just slightly over 12 months ago, of the US administration to mandate Zero Trust as a security model for all US public and private sector entities serving the federal government. Now, this is not a reason to go into this in depth and look at the US regulatory landscape, but to instead think about its impact. The adoption of Zero Trust architecture and mandates around identity-based control, policy, enforcement points, and risk-based authorization, and other factors of Zero Trust models was actually something that was required to be put together very quickly. Departments had 90 days to turn this around. They are now executing on this roadmap to get to where they're trying to get to. And we've seen that have quite a large impact on client adoption in the private sector. So not just in the US, but also internationally. Clients all over Europe are looking to pivot away from that perimeter-based model, the Bastille, and move towards a new paradigm to reflect the fact that more clients are moving to the cloud, and they also want their security to be delivered from the cloud as well. And you will find examples of the National Cybersecurity Centre in the Netherlands and the UK who are also following this example and embedding this within the private sector, whether you're the bakery shop round the corner or whether you're a large FTSE 100 enterprise. Madeleine, back to you.
Well, Zero Trust has become the modern security architecture blueprint, actually, for enterprises. And Forrester conducts a security survey every year, and actually 88% of our respondents have said that their organization is committed to adopt a Zero Trust security strategy. And, well, as Paul said, it is dominating legislation and conversations. I lately have listened into loads of earning calls from vendors, and everyone is positioning their portfolio in order to help their clients in a better way to adjust to the zero trust strategy via the zero trust model. But over a third of European businesses have a zero trust strategy. So there's a lot to improve, because this means that there are still a lot of companies that are at a primary phase when it comes to zero trust. And with supply chain being a top factor, we must take into account and help each other move to this zero trust model. And what we also see is that zero trust is accelerated by breaches. We often see that companies actually change their investment profiles and priorities after experiencing a specific breach. Instead of looking at the overall picture, what we must do when adapting to a zero trust strategy. And this is more reactive and a narrow approach. Technology leaders have mentioned to us in the survey that I mentioned before that they are highly impacted by the effects of breaches. And then especially they're talking about interruption of corporate business process, so business continuity, that they are highly impacted in that space, but also cyber insurance repercussions and diminished employee experience. What we do expect with the evolving regulation is that zero trust adoption is going to grow more in the future.
Okay, thank you very much, Madeleine. So to give everyone a little bit of a definition to take away, we thought it would be worthwhile to actually clarify what we mean by zero trust, because you'll see a lot of different definitions out there in the market. Now, I'm not going to read all of the aspects of the text in the center here, but I think the good way to think about zero trust, it is a conceptual information security model that denies access to applications and data by default. And with that comes with a number of principles, and you apply those principles throughout your architecture and across all the different pillars of a security stack, from identity right through to networking. So some of the principles that are worth going through is that all entities are expecting to get access to a resource that they need to perform their job function. So this could be a SaaS application, this could be a user on a device looking to access a file in a SharePoint site or whatever. All entities are untrusted by default. So you need to understand, who is that user? Why are they trying to access that resource? And should they even have access to that resource at all? You enforce least privilege so that you minimize your attack surface. And to ensure that you have visibility over what's going on in your environment, both from an incident response perspective, it's important to implement comprehensive security monitoring. And what's actually very interesting about this latter point is that this becomes a reinforcement mechanism to learn about your zero trust deployment in the wild and understand how you should evolve your policy. Because you may discover that a policy you've implemented is actually harming your users, and this will allow you to tailor and optimize to continue to focus on the business benefits and employee experience, so that while security is important, if it's done well, it should be as invisible to users as it possibly can be. So this is quite a useful way of thinking about it. It's a model of principles, and you follow those principles as far as you can using the technology that is available in the market. So back to you, Madeleine. Now, from my perspective, the other thing that is driving adoption here is that customers that we work with, both in the security space and the technology space, are actually focused very much on the migration to the cloud. From a broader European perspective, this is something that we see where Europe has been a bit of a laggard in traditionally for reasons around things like data sovereignty and data privacy concerns, but that is not the case anymore, and clients are moving to this reality now. So we see clients prioritizing boosting their cloud security strategy, and that's not just about securing the cloud once you get there, but this is also about delivering security from the cloud as well. So we want to see things moving into the cloud from a security perspective. We want the vendors and service providers to manage that infrastructure for us. We want to have more consistency around the kind of pricing controls that we have. So moving back to you, Madeleine. And from my perspective, the final aspect here is to give a little bit of a perspective on how we define how some of this is actually coming through from a technology landscape, which is with a concept we call Zero Trust Edge. So this is the term we apply to a number of security and networking capabilities, which traditionally have been managed on premises by customers at their own expense and maintenance and all that sort of stuff, moving that into the cloud. So we're looking to move capabilities that securely connect traffic from on-premises into the cloud, leveraging Zero Trust principles across multiple sites and multiple cloud and security networking services. So usually this is run by a third-party provider. It could be your telco provider, could be a security vendor or a networking provider, and it must have Zero Trust network access as its prime security service. So this is a service which allows you to have remote access managed in a fine-grained manner going into some of the cloud-based services and apps that you manage.
So, and last but not least, my favorite part, because Zero Trust brings benefits. Empowerment, predictability, better alignment, and enablement. So, empowerment is very important when it comes to your employee engagement. You're able to offer them more technology choices. You, for instance, have the ability to roll out bring your own device programs, and also relieving employees of the burden of dealing with security. When employees access apps, they don't worry about whether they're doing it securely. Zero Trust does the securing for them. And while Paul mentioned it before, I mentioned it also before, Zero Trust starts in the cloud. And this is not only giving better predictability of your cost structure with pay-per-use, it is also very easily to scale. So with growing workforces and especially growing traffic volumes, it is easier to comprehend. And it also better aligns shifting security solutions to be closer to cloud workloads. And with this, it is reducing complexity and increasing visibility. And this is something we hear a lot from our CISO clients. They are in need to have complexity reduced and visibility increased. And 43 of respondents with fully deployed Zero Trust saw savings on data breach costs as well. And then enablement. Zero Trust enhances the employee technology experience by reducing cognitive loads by eliminating, for instance, passwords, easing access to information by removing the need for VPN, and enhancing technology performance by reducing agent usage. So there are loads of benefits when introducing and implementing the Zero Trust framework and model when bringing to your customer. So, John.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much, Madeleine. I really appreciated the overview and the continuation of what I thought was a loose analogy in terms of going back to the future. So I was really enjoying the Bastille reference. But if I'm honest, I felt sorry for Frank. I'm speaking on behalf of the audience here as well. Poor Frank, right? We all know Frank, but Frank will adapt, right? Frank will adapt. So, folks, I'd just like to remind you that in the Q&A box that you'll see down here, you can ask any question that you've heard from our colleagues from Forrester. I'd like to thank you, the 16 folks that have already responded, and I'm going to get into some of those questions. There's a couple of themes that are universal, so I'll bring a couple together at the moment. But I do want to kind of ask you on the call a quick poll. So folks, if you were looking at your network and your assets, what do you believe your biggest barrier to adopting a combined security and network approach would be? So if I can ask you to take your mouse and click on a couple of these questions, which one you think? Lack of budget, organizational readiness, the right partner to work with. I can see some coming in. Very nice. I see no need for this approach. Already rolled out a solution. Please click on and let's just a couple more moments. I can see a few more people diving in. So let me just move into the next section to see the results. Wow. I would say that would be pretty comprehensive, that a lack of budget will be the biggest barrier to adopting a combined and security network approach. To re-ape my Back to the Future reference, that's a very familiar story that I've heard in one of my latest conversations around the execution of certain projects. But in the Back to the Future story, you always needed a DeLorean to actually make that happen away from the lack of budget. So the DeLorean in this case is the technology layer and the applications that run upon it. And again, if this isn't a loose analogy, Andy, I don't know what is, but let me pass across to you.
I'm enjoying this.
To talk about what Vodafone's perspective is in bringing some of those assets together. So Andy, over to you to bring us back to the future.
Seamless. Thanks, John. Yeah, let me take you through our secure connected enterprise proposition and how it kind of aligns to a lot of stuff you've heard previously. We'll also look at a couple of specific industries and verticals to kind of give you some real world examples of how it can help you. So what we said about designing secure connected enterprise, the key thing for me was that we didn't want to fall into the same type of messaging that we saw from a lot of other different security products. So a lot of the marketing was around, you've got a massive threat over here, be really worried, there's this data breach coming, there's this attacker that's after your information. And effectively that causes a real kind of, almost like a mental block for some customers, thinking that technology is dangerous, there's limitations, there's a real risk to applying this sort of stuff. Do I really want to expose my business to that sort of threat? So with Secure Connected Enterprise, we wanted to be really confident, show customers that with the right foundations and the right architecture, you really can embrace all of these new technologies. You can be much more innovative, much more agile, and much more aligned, and much more successful in the future. So if I look at the actual component pieces, the stuff we've kind of almost encircled there, we've squared in the middle, that's your Zero Trust Edge platform that Madeline and Paul have just talked you through. So effectively, networking and security working together in harmony. Because we're a large telecommunications provider, we also have access to a very, very big enterprise network, so we can connect you with the physical underlay circuits as well to help you to secure that part. We then move to the right and we look at things like device security. So unified endpoint management, you might hear it referred to, or mobile device management. But basically what we're saying is that with Secure Connected Enterprise, we can secure everything from your endpoint right the way through all the network transit. The security policy sits in the cloud, and your application is covered right the way through. So it really is a seamless level of protection that you're getting from this kind of this architecture that we're proposing. Now, one big thing I will mention quickly is that none of these components are actually mandatory with Secure Connected Enterprise. It's effectively a modular solution where you can choose which component parts you're ready to take, which bits are most important to you to deliver first, and then you can start to build them up. And as you kind of build up, the level of protection increases. Okay. So let's look at a couple of the industries. First one to go through is around, it's around kind of manufacturing, what we're seeing around there. There's a huge amount of technological development that's happening, and it really is starting to pay some really strong benefits. So if I look at things like multi-access edge computing, or MEC as we refer to it, this is basically taking your cloud workloads, your applications, and running them closer to your users or to your data or to your applications, or whatever the defining factor for you is. We do that because we can start to be much more responsive in terms of how that application performs and the speed with which you can get your processing done. Within an industrial kind of landscape, we can use things like computer vision, we can use autonomous robots. There's lots of different technological advances that we can use to streamline and optimize that performance. Now we've got faster performing applications. Okay. Next up, you look at the actual connectivity around the site, and there's a shift that's been happening for a while, but we're now seeing lots of different use cases demanding lots of different types of connectivity. You've got things like Wi-Fi 6, which now allow us to connect many more users and applications and devices to each access point. You get better throughput and better security. For things like short-term or near-field communications, Bluetooth or NFC, really, really strong operations there. But increasingly, we're starting to see the mobile network play a part. If you've got a particularly large site or a campus or a particular kind of specific type of geography, we can deploy a mobile private network in that instance. You can use the mobile network with all the 5G characteristics of low latency, high bandwidth and high performance to extend that right across your factory site. We've got a great case study actually with Ford, where they've deployed an MPN in their factory in the UK to build out a kind of a 5G service that they're now using to really optimize how that operation is kind of working and how it's delivering for them, which is great to see actually. Final point around manufacturing is around supply chain. And actually, this is kind of a wider point as well. In the last few weeks, even, we've seen a couple of really damaging breaches around a supply chain type of attack. So in this example, one of your suppliers who you might buy a component from or who you work with or who you partner with, their IT may be not up to the same levels that your IT is. So what happens is an attacker can break into their IT, can compromise them, use the links that you have with them to access your data, your services and your applications. Which doesn't seem fair, really, but that's kind of how they're doing it. With zero trust in this scenario, what happens is your supplier only has access to a very, very small slice of your IT architecture, of your estate. They can only see a tiny proportion that you've explicitly granted them access to. And that means that when an attacker comes through your supply chain, the actual impact of that breach is incredibly small. You've minimized that attack threat really, really well because that small granular access you've given it to, yes, they can get to there, but they can't use that to then hop off and get onto different parts of your applications and different parts of your estate. Now, if I think about logistics and distribution in particular, there's been a massive step change in customer expectations around things like asset tracking. I, for one, if I order something online, I almost expect to be able to see where it is the minute it leaves the distribution centre to the minute it arrives at my front door. And if I can't get that, I might get a little bit grumpy. It might impact my customer experience. I might be a bit less likely to leave a positive review. So there's lots of kind of follow-ons that kind of come from this. What this does mean, though, is that we are creating and curating and generating lots of data. So we have all these assets, all of these pallets or parcels or devices, whatever they happen to be. And every few minutes, they're saying, here I am, this is my location. And we're storing that and we're putting it somewhere and we are looking after and managing that data. Same for autonomous vehicles. A lot of distribution centres now are using autonomous vehicles to move pallets and parcels of packages around to get them into the right places. And that's great because it means that you don't need to worry about having people on site 24/7. They can be doing more value-add type of capabilities for you. But again, these vehicles are using lots of video, they're using lots of information, and we're storing that and we're gathering it. And you know what? It just becomes huge. In terms of physical security, this is CCTV effectively. There's a brilliant stat that something like 98% of all CCTV images that we capture are never actually seen by a human being, which is becoming actually all right because we're starting to use a lot of computer learning, a lot of machine learning, computer vision, to analyze these data and to look at what's happening. And we're starting to interpret a lot more of this information that we're getting. You can start to use analytics to really build out some quite compelling optimization use cases. So one good example would be if you've got a particular area of your distribution center, which is typically around, let's say, where the coffee machines are. You'll have a lot of people around that area, a lot of people working and moving around. It means that if you do have autonomous vehicles, you want to make absolutely certain that they're routed around that area and not straight through because you don't want to cause any health and safety issues. You don't want to have them having to stop constantly to allow people to walk in front. So we can be much more deterministic about where we send these devices and how they operate. And we can really see a step change in improvement and optimization from doing that type of stuff. Finally, when you have something ready to be delivered, ready to be distributed, to move on to the next site, by definition, that parcel or that driver or whatever it happens to be will have some level of sensitive information with it, whether that's an address or a name or some kind of tag or reference. Fundamentally, there's something there that is sensitive to you as a distributor, as a kind of an organization. So it's really important now that you have that level of protection for your data once it's out and about as much as you do when it's on site. So things like Zero Trust Edge are a brilliant way of saying, right, my cloud policy, my enforcement is all delivered from the cloud. So no matter where I happen to be globally, I'm still going to use that same level of enforcement, that same level of policy, and that same level of protection, no matter where my data or my applications or my pallets or my devices, whatever they happen to be, no matter where they are. Final one to talk through is financial services and particularly kind of retail banking, if you like. We've seen a bit of a shift since the pandemic. If you kind of cast your minds back 5 or so years, bank branches were very stale, very kind of quite often dark places where people would go to do their banking and then they would leave as soon as they possibly could. We're starting to see a bit of a shift now towards branches becoming community hubs almost, where they're starting to get people in. They've quite often got sofas you can sit down and you can kind of maybe log in on guest Wi-Fi to check your emails, to do a little bit of work if you're waiting for somebody else. So that kind of guest Wi-Fi supporting environment becomes quite important for customer experience. You also look at things like video calls. If someone comes into a branch looking for a mortgage appointment or to talk about their pension, if they haven't got someone in branch, they can connect a video call, they can access the right type of user, the right type of advocate, and all of a sudden their customer experience goes through the roof and they're very happy. But again, that's all dependent on having the right connectivity and the security in place to allow it. Smart surveillance, again, we're talking about CCTV and that type of stuff, so I won't labour that. So if we move through, Madeline and Paul both mentioned hybrid working and how it's changed recently. I say recently, so it still feels like it is quite a recent change. What it means, though, is that if I am a chief security officer, I'm going to have many, many sleepless nights thinking about who can access my data, where they happen to be, what they're up to, who's looking over their shoulder. You've got a whole new set of challenges that you have to manage. With something like Zero Trust and Zero Trust Edge in particular, you can be really granular. You can say that when Andy is working in the office, he's got past my physical security, he's accessed the Wi-Fi using his certificate, so I can sort of give him a little bit of trust, allow him to access everything that he's got a business need to get access to. But if I know he's out and about, if he's connected through a kind of remote access service, if he's established a zero trust connection, that's great. I still trust Andy because I know I've used his fingerprint or his facial print or he's got two-factor authentication, whatever it happens to be. But I don't know who's around him. I don't know who's looking over his shoulder. I don't know who may have kind of, I don't know, knocked him out with a cup of coffee and all of a sudden someone else has access to your laptop. So I'm not going to give him access to my most sensitive stuff, just the bits over here that I'm kind of okay with kind of getting out if I had to be. That level of granularity is huge. We can only do that with the right levels of zero trust implementation. Now, our final point, if you think about, I'll click too far. John, I'll click too far. Hang on. I'm going to go back. So, cloud exit plans, particularly in financial services, there's been a move recently in certain countries to enforce cloud exit plans. So if you're running applications at a certain cloud provider, you've got to be able to justify if they're of a sort of certain level of criticality. You've got to be able to prove that if that cloud provider goes away, if they fail, if that platform gets taken away or shut down, that you can move your application to another place and have it up and running without kind of significant losses of time, of customer experience, without any kind of negative implications, effectively. What this means for your security policy is that you don't want to have all of your enforcement happening in a single place. You want to have it distributed so that when you move that application from cloud provider A to cloud provider B or to a private data center, your policy follows it no matter where that workload goes. And that's where you start to see huge benefits from Zero Trust Edge in particular, because you can start to say, actually, you know what, my platform was running over here, but it's now running over there. The policy stays exactly the same, but my destination gets updated, and all of a sudden I'm moving from here to here, and nothing else has to really happen. So that's all I was going to say. I hope that was useful. I will pass it back to you, John, to cover the poll question that I spectacularly revealed a minute earlier.
It's wonderful. We'll hang on this slide for a couple of moments, Andy. We've got the exact opposite of zero trust, my friend. I fully trust you to not only leak everything that I've got in terms of poll into the future. A couple of observations on behalf of the audience because of what I felt from that. So firstly, I actually really like just a quick callback to the first presentation talking about the Bastille, the castle, because actually what you've described here is 4 versions of the creation of a new type of castle for the organisations that are looking to amend their ways of working. The second kind of observation is where Frank will sit in this. Not only where Frank will sit when he's at work, but when Frank leaves the building and goes and does his chores on his lunch break, the experience that Frank will have in terms of his banking, his services, etc.
Yeah.
And actually,
that's
Frank could be
number 3, making his coffee.
Exactly, absolutely. So Frank's more likely to do that. But at some point, we're all going to be Frank, and we're all going to be designing the future of those castles. So let me move into what can only be described as an already leaked set of poll questions. So I'm just going to go forward there, and I'm going to ask everyone in the call, what are the biggest benefits that you see from adopting a combined security and network service for your organisation? So there's a couple of options there as you hover your mouse and you start to think: is it securing third-party access, giving frank access? Is it reducing the resort needs and complexity to allow Frank to kind of think how he's operating? Is it simply allowing Frank to secure the work that he does, where he wants to do it, and reduce the hurdles for him? Or is it support Frank, move from his desk and move into a more hybrid state? So literally, I want you to think about Frank and tell me what the biggest benefits you could see from adopting this security and network service. Right, and let's go and see how you guys have voted. Again, we have an absolute landslide in terms of results there. So supporting organisations' digital transformation is how you folks are starting to look at things. Interesting. So actually, Andy, I'll just ask, I'll press pause there as we move into the kind of final section of the presentation, just to, I guess, you to comment on a couple of things. In both scenarios, in both poll questions, fairly universal. We've got a very aligned group of people here. We've talked about cost, and then we've talked about the opportunity to move towards a digital. Are they the things that you see as you speak to customers out in the wild?
I do. I'll be honest, I was surprised by the cost, getting 100% of the responses. One of the common themes that we get when we talk to customers is the complexity from an organizational perspective of joining networking and security teams, because quite often your network team reports up into your IT director, your security team reports up into your CISO, and they're quite often not at loggerheads, but they don't always see eye to eye. One of the benefits of Zero Trust Edge is that you can buy a single set of technology, and that means you've got to have two competing departments choosing a single vendor. We have seen that called out quite regularly as a bit of a challenge. So yeah, I was surprised by the cost getting 100%. In terms of digital transformation, that one kind of makes absolute sense. I think every customer I talk to is on a cloud-first journey or a cloud transformation or a digital-first journey or a digitization approach. Everyone's got a slightly different way of phrasing it, but they're all doing similar things, as in moving many more workloads into the cloud, so being much more flexible, much more agile, typically adopting kind of internet-based networking where they can, again, be much more flexible. They can connect users to cloud platforms much faster. So yeah, I'm not surprised by the digital transformation one, I'll be honest.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andy. Well, look, I'm actually just going to remind everyone that you can join the ever-swelling list of questions that I have in the inbox, which I'm going to go through. And I'm going to come on to those in a moment. But I will just ask Madeline first, just your reflections on the feedback that we got from the polls, just from the cast and the digital transformation perspective. And any reflections on that?
Well, the cost, it did surprise me that it was actually 100%. It didn't surprise me that it was there and that people are commenting on that, because when looking at security and day-to-day operations, we have to do tools that are coming, evolving landscapes, securing for everything and adapting to a zero trust model. It takes away from your IT budget and your securing budget. So to me, that was actually not a surprise. The digital transformation as well. Zero Trust should be a part of your digital transformation, in my opinion, to add to that.
Okay. Well, I think it's probably also worth saying, having been a host and a moderator of many of these panel conversations, if you do get 100% swing in a poll, there could be a little bit of technical in the background, and which, not that I'm suggesting I zero trust the results, but I think the probable results were probably a little bit more blended. So this is the beauty of any live event. The people accessing this on demand, of course, can now smile and feel smug that they're enjoying us. But at the same time, I think there's a little bit more of a blend. Paul, would you concur that there normally is a little bit of a wider range of opinion?
Yeah, I would certainly say so, especially on the second of the questions around digital transformation. Because when I have had conversations about zero trust edge implementations in particular, some of the aspects around third-party supply chain access and remote work and simplification of remote work are actually, in many cases, very high up on the list as well. The one thing I'd add to the reflections that have already gone on around the two polling questions is that I'm actually not surprised that it was 100% on budget, because the most common scenario that I come across with organizations I work with is that security departments and networking departments actually start working on elements of zero trust in isolation and don't actually work with each other. And they don't connect it to business benefits. So when the business get the kind of request saying, can we have X million euros or pounds or whatever currency you want to say this in, to do zero trust, they haven't gone with a business case focused on business value. And it's very much around, oh, there's this new security model that does secure identities or microsegmentation. We want to extend our SD-WAN implementations. And the business tend to fizzle those out. The magic scenario is where the security spending and the technology spending are blended together, because there's either a cloud migration or some kind of digital workspace transformation going on, or even some of the specific use cases in factories or logistics depots that were highlighted by Andy, where there's a really clear business rationale around simplification, cost reduction, and productivity that actually drives that through in the business. Say, yeah, of course, zero trust is a security model that helps us to do that. Crack on. So that's the magic, is getting to that point. But I do see a lot of initiatives fail because they're not connected, and that's where the budgetary challenges, I think, come in.
Yeah. That's interesting, actually, and of course, well, the other thing that I thought was very insightful was the deployment from a framework perspective of the US government, applying it as zero trust as standard. Now, that's obviously means something in terms of the way that standards have been set in some key departments out there. But I think whilst public bodies naturally need to be perhaps more overt in their description of how they're protecting the public's assets and information, etc. The same principles are applicable to a variety of different temperatures, I suppose, within private or local or small businesses. So actually, I'm really interested in a couple of the questions that are coming in in my Q&A panel here, Paul. I'm going to start with you, actually, just on that topic that you just raised. And actually, because I'm a commercial guy, I'm always interested in kind of what things are going to drive my KPIs. How am I going to meet my targets as an individual and therefore the business targets? Where do people set KPIs and what do they set as KPIs when applying such a model?
Okay, so I think the first thing to kind of highlight is that when you're setting KPIs, you need to differentiate between the strategic business KPIs that are actually going to matter to you as a commercial guy, because you've got to weigh up this investment opportunity versus something else that maybe is going to make you a nice big packet of money over here somewhere. Maybe you can stick that money in your DeLorean and Frank can drive off with it on his way to his coffee shop down the road that he's going to work in today. But the typical business KPIs that I tend to focus on are moving to Zero Trust Edge is actually, there's a massive cost saving opportunity here, because you see the ability to move from a scenario where you might have, for example, it's not unusual to have 6 or 7 different types of technologies and vendors, or even as many vendors as you can name, deployed on the perimeter, securing current models, the kind of thinking back to the Bastille model. When you actually think about moving to the cloud, you can consolidate that round maybe one in some cases for smaller organizations, or maybe a smaller subset of vendors, maybe 2 or 3. You can get a lot of complexity reduction and cost takeout. So cost savings is probably one of the big ones. The second one that I would look at from a kind of resiliency perspective is actually, this should be a more resilient solution. So I should see higher levels of uptime and availability, and therefore more productivity, less downtime. So it should allow my business, wherever it happens to be more productive all of the time, more of the time, because I'm less reliant on infrastructure that may not be scaled for the purposes I need it to be. Then I think the final thing that I'd be looking at as well is, as you remove friction points from a person's ability to access some kind of cloud application that they're trying to get access to do their job. You can see some productivity benefits in there in terms of the ease of which they can do that. There are less roadblocks in the way, or they're more streamlined because you've got policy that allows you to do that in certain situations. So you actually see a more productive workforce, a more engaged workforce. So you should see higher levels of employee satisfaction. So one thing that we track in Forrester, for example, for our technology organizations, we track the satisfaction levels with the technology. Do I have the right tech available to do my work? And that's genuinely improved, and we have implemented a zero trust model ourselves internally. Obviously, we're not the biggest organization in the world, but it has helped a lot in terms of making the technology we have more fit for purpose and remove the barriers that come with some aspects of security. So it's generally a positive thing. And those are the key business KPIs that I would tend to focus on.
Fantastic. I think subtly you've just nudged or knocked on the door where Frank works again, because what Frank will be appreciative of is the fact that he's getting better access to better things at better times to help him create a better life at work. Good old Frank. I didn't realise he could quite take the amount of time he has in this production. But, well, thanks for introducing us to Frank. Now, going back to that Bastille reference as well, Andy, I'm going to ask you, when organisations and people on this call are looking to kind of build the Bastille, how do they go and create a zero trust approach for implementation? What's that's a couple of the key questions that are coming out. So how do you actually go and build the Bastille?
The most important thing I would do is make sure you've got your business engaged first. I've got time for a quick story, right? Just before the pandemic, what we did, we worked with a UK government department who were buying a replacement for the remote access platform. They had about 40,000 users. They had an old kind of remote access platform, and it was old, it was end of life, it needed to be replaced. So we worked with their procurement teams and with their architecture team. We built this new product that said, this is fantastic, it's zero trust, it's going to do all this kind of cool stuff for you. But brilliant, we'll buy that. Contracts were signed. They took the requirements we gave them that said, you need to define this policy for every one of your applications. They took that requirement to their IT team and said, can you go and build us this requirement, this policy for all our applications? The IT team looked at it and went, nah, get stuff, we're not doing that. There's a huge amount of work they would have to do to say, actually, do you know what? I've got to build over 600 granular application policies. No way I'm doing that, but I have been involved in the procurement decision. So it all kind of fizzled out. We cancelled the contract and it all got a little bit kind of heated their side with their IT teams and procurement teams. But I kid you not, 4 weeks later, the UK went into lockdown. Everyone got sent home. The remote access platform crashed in spectacular style. And they were straight on the phone saying, you know, that zero trust platform, we kind of need that one now. And we know within a few weeks it was spun up and they're all good to go. But the reason for making that point is that there's a lot of work involved in building out the level of policy you need for all your applications. They had 600. And that's probably about average for a kind of a government department. At a smaller end, you might have 10, 20, so it's quite straightforward. At a higher end, you kind of your multinational corporates, they could have thousands of applications. So when you are going about building these types of services, make sure you've got everyone right the way across your kind of value chain engaged. The other thing I would say is try not to be led by, I guess, vendor features and capabilities. There's a lot of parity now between the different vendors. For quite a long time, you were effectively choosing between a really good security vendor and a really good networking vendor. No one kind of had good enough, if you like, in both stacks. We're now at a point where there's quite a few vendors that do have the level of capabilities. So what I would say is and I may sound completely partisan by saying this, but let your service provider partner help you with choosing the right vendor. We typically have a more kind of impartial view, if you like, of the market. So we've seen recently a lot of improvement and increase actually in the amount of time that the security vendors in particular are spending with customers on extolling the benefits of zero trust. But it's always, oh, and by the way, we do it best. They're always going to say that, right? And we also, as a service provider, we're the best service provider. But when it comes to choosing a vendor to deliver that type of service, I think we do have quite an impartial view. So I would trust your service provider to find the right technology rather than find technology first and then the service provider.
That's fantastic. That actually grouped together a few of the questions that I can see in my chat bar. So look, I'm going to move to a final question. I'm going to ask this to each of you. And the question will be the same. I'm actually going to ask you for that Back to the Future moment once again that unites Frank, the Bastille, but your opinion. And this is one of those, John, why are you asking this on a webinar kind of questions? But it's around the future of tech. But I do want you to genuinely jump in that DeLorean. So, Madeline, I will start with you. And I'm going to ask you, what sorts of technologies do you see having the biggest impact to this sort of framework? So what sort of technology do you see coming along the line? So over to you.
You know, I think that Frank maybe had a bit of fun with this. And, you know, with that, I mean ChatGPT. You never know. But I think one of the technologies and what we see is, for instance, generative AI, which will impact businesses and, for instance, as well, focus on automation of workplace tasks. So, yes, I think such developments will have an increasing impact on as well how companies approach zero trust, but also how security and our view on security will develop.
Fantastic. A great answer. And it wouldn't be a technology webinar without at least one mention of ChatGPT. So for the keen observers, ding, that was the mention. Thank you very much. But all jokes aside, if you're ignoring generative automation, then you're ignoring where technology vendors are going to go. So thank you very much, Madeline. That was great. Paul, same question to you. The technologies you see having the biggest impact.
Okay, so I think I'm going to take a slightly more industrial angle to talk a little bit more to some of the manufacturing aspects. So one of the big things that I think we expected to see a couple of years ago when we saw all of these 5G pilots, which has maybe been a little bit slower to come through because of the delayed ability to invest at scale because of the economic circumstances we're in now, and then obviously the situation in the pandemic. I still think there's a role to play for some of the use cases around 5G, in particular some of the applications of that within port authorities, remote factories, and those kind of areas where you need some of the specific features of 5G to deploy certain use cases. I'm thinking of things like augmented reality, everyone being able to take in the footy at a football stadium, and I'm going to leave the football team blank so that I don't offend anyone with revealing which team I may or may not support. So from my perspective, there's still a lot of promise in some of those use cases. Of course, in the general connectivity space, there's a lot of nonsense out there in terms of hype and vendors saying XYZ will happen and it'll transform the world. And of course, you kind of have the perspective that for some of those use cases, existing technology can already do that. And you don't need things like 5G or even 6G is starting to come up in conversation in some quarters. So I'd also see some role for some of the connectivity technology to play, given that Madeleine already took the obligatory ChatGPT response already.
Thank you very much. And to be fair, it's I'm glad that it didn't venture into industrial language there, Paul. I know it could have done if you'd gone further into the football team, I'm sure. So we will, the final point to Andy, and again, I'm sure you've got a vast array of ideas, but I am going to ask you for one, Andy.
So I asked ChatGPT for my response. So the one I'm going to go with actually is multi-cloud networking. So we've had SD-WAN around for a while, right? Since about 2016 probably. And customers are now comfortable with it. It's quite mature in the technology space. Multi-cloud network kind of extends that SD-WAN right into the cloud. So you start to use lots of the kind of AWS and Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud Platform networking constructs. And all of a sudden you've got this real end-to-end type of service. The best multi-cloud networking solutions already have zero trust built into them. And I think it's a natural extension because if you've got Frank sat in his coffee shop accessing a cloud workload, if he can do it with an end-to-end zero trust capability right into and between clouds, that's his utopia, right? That's his kind of manna from heaven. So I would go with multi-cloud networking as the kind of next big thing, if you like, for enterprise networks.
Thank you very much. Great summary. I really appreciate the questions that have come in, the contribution on the polls, and firstly to everyone that's tuned in, I'd like to thank you for joining us. Now, there is a couple of things I'd just like to give you in summary. The materials that you've got that you can see here or here, you can download. These are supporting pieces of information for today's content, and there's some also links there to give you some prompts for maybe continuing the conversation. And actually, when this live broadcast wraps, there will be a survey for you to give us a view on how you found today, give us some tips on areas you might want to go a bit deeper, or give us some feedback in what you want to see more. Now, the questions and answers on that are super important for us, and we really appreciate your time to take a moment to deliver, because it will shape the rest of this series that we're going to feature. So if you're watching this live or you are downloaded from our masterclass site, and I will thank you again, but it would be rude of me not to thank our guests. So firstly, Forrester, I'd like to thank you, Paul and Madeline, for your great contributions. Andy, thank you again for your support on yet another webinar. And of course, it wouldn't be this webinar without thanking not only Frank, but the Bastille to really bring the future of zero trust approaches alive. So I'm going to end by posting towards a video that really brings a lot of the themes that we've discussed today alive across the Vodafone context. So folks, thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next one.